Wednesday! Sarah Gilkerson. Hi. So I loved your video about environmental rights, and you look all tan and, yes, a little bit culture shocked. So now that we've started this super interesting conversation about environmental justice, I'm going to stay right on topic and talk to you about homophobia. I'm sure there's a connection somewhere. So, as you know, in 6 short days, my entire life and existence is going to be consumed by an equality campaign that I'm working for in Maine. And seeing as that I'm really close to Vermont right now, and Vermont was the fourth state to legalize marriage in 2009, I figured I'll see what people are up to here after marriage has been legalized and see what the LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bi, trans, queer, alphabet soup, community is up to. So I was actually really surprised when I started looking around Brattleboro area to find people to interview that there weren't really that many organizations. The one that I did find is run by Alex Potter, who I ended up interviewing, and he's awesome. And it's basically an AIDS prevention group, and he runs the men's group, which is a big part of that. He'll talk a little bit about that. And this was a great interview, and I ended up talking to him for like 40 minutes, and I could seriously make at least 4 videos on different topics from everything we talked about. I want to keep it broad, though, and look at the LGBTQ community in Vermont right now and how homophobia has died and thrived in this progressive little state. So, here's Alex.
I work for the AIDS Project of Southern Vermont, and specifically the men's program, which is a gay and bisexual men's prevention program, an HIV prevention program. So for the last 8 years, I've been working under a federally funded program, and the funding comes through the Centers for Disease Control to help prevent HIV infection in the gay and bisexual men's community, because the gay and bisexual men's community in the United States is still the population that has the highest rates of infection. This is a rural area where there aren't a lot of gathering places for gay men to come together. What the men's program has done in a number of ways is tried to work on creating that healthy community for guys. A lot of research has been done on what's effective in prevention. And we have found that what is effective is helping to create solid gay and bi men's community. There are a lot of people who don't feel the federal government should be funding the creation of gay and bi men's community. So there's been a lot of kickback around the fact that one of the important pieces of creating gay and bi men's community is talking very openly and frankly about sex. The federal government has chosen this program because it's been scientifically evaluated. It works. We have a lot of LGBT presence throughout the state, but here in Windham County we have a very friendly community, but we also don't have a real strongly visible LGBTQ community in this area. But you don't see 2 men walking down the street holding hands. It's not San Francisco. It's not Boston. A lot of people still have that feeling of, okay, I'm 15, I feel really different from my peers, and I don't see any adults who look like what I feel. Despite the fact that Vermont is very well known as a very progressive and friendly area, getting over that hump was pretty hard. When civil unions went in, and Vermont was the first state to legalize civil union, there was a huge kickback. We had what was called the Take Back Vermont movement, where all over Vermont signs were going up, Take Back Vermont, we don't want civil union. There's this strong undercurrent in Vermont where there is still some real homophobia sitting down there. And what was very interesting was, during the civil union process, there was a lot of kickback. However, the process succeeded. A few years later, when the issue of legalizing same-sex marriage came up, it was completely different. There was still resistance, but there was not the kind of organized kickback that there was with the Take Back Vermont movement. And often, the people who work with marriage equality said that as they talked to people, it was about the fact that people had watched civil unions come in and nothing really changed. The world didn't fall apart. Their communities didn't suddenly change in massive ways. And all of a sudden people became conscious of the fact that, oh, this really isn't that big a deal. Doesn't mean there isn't still that, I want to say xenophobic almost, you know. We like who looks like us. We like people who are like us. We had a recent article in one of the local papers about two young men who had graduated in the last 5 years from one of the high schools. And again, super progressive, Windham County, wonderful county. Both of these two young men waited until they went out of state to college before they came out as gay. They knew in high school that they were gay. They knew some people in their circles who they thought would probably be supportive of them. They did not feel comfortable coming out in the high school environment. So there's still that tension, even though Vermont, I think, as a small rural state, can be seen as much further along. I think it absolutely has an effect, and the reason I say that is because the difference Vermont experienced between passing civil unions and passing marriage. I think it affected that level of homophobia that says, we can't do this because it's the basis of civilization, and civilization is going to crumble. Oh, civilization didn't crumble. Wow. Maybe we were wrong. I think it affected homophobia so much on that level. I think that sometimes, this is going to sound like a broad generalization, and I don't intend it that way, marriage is an issue straight people can understand and get their hands around, and in that way, I think it has been helpful for the straight community to see marriage come in. I think that one of the things that was effective around civil unions and that helped get it passed was individual stories. Individuals coming out and talking about their story and coming out on the job and saying to their coworkers, you know, I'm gay. That affects me, has a huge impact. When people suddenly know someone who is gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, it can make a huge impact on how they feel. That's where personal experience and personal story and being willing to be out in the world is a place that I would encourage. That doesn't mean I don't understand that that's really difficult and that it's easy for me to say living in Windham County in Vermont. It could be a very different story for people living in a small town in Maine. If you can do so safely, it's a great way to help move people forward.
All right, Sarah. So this brings up a couple of different things for me. So the biggest is that it seems like post-marriage legalization, things haven't changed that drastically. First, does crisis and oppression create a stronger community for the oppressed when it's clearly visible? I think so. Should it come as such a surprise that the LGBTQ community isn't as strong now or as organized now as it was during, say, a legalization struggle? Another thing is that it's almost funny how true it is that people's communities didn't change drastically when something like marriage came along and was legalized. And we often say this as a really positive thing, like, oh, everyone can get married in your community now, and look, your lives haven't changed, nothing's changed, hooray. But what does that really mean? I mean, if the community and the people in it have core values that tend towards discrimination rather than acceptance, do we really want to promote an unchanged social landscape and call this a good thing? I guess I didn't expect legalizing marriage to remove homophobia, but it's interesting to consider what roles legal action take when removing discrimination of all kinds, not just in this particular case. I mean, look at the civil rights movement. Laws were passed, people were assassinated, and violence brewed and exploded. And yet still, I think that only an incredibly oblivious person would say that in the United States there's no racism. My boss here in Vermont, Massachusetts, once told me over dinner that she thought that the LGBTQ rights struggle is the civil rights movement equivalent of my generation, and I think to an extent that she's right. But what does that actually mean? I mean, as marriage becomes legalized across the nation slowly, where will homophobia find its new place? Because it's not going to evaporate. How do we change the way that people are thinking about people different from themselves? And maybe more importantly, what right do I have, or does anyone have, to tell them what or how to believe? Now, I'm a huge, huge, huge supporter of equal rights. I'm working for a marriage campaign. But without looking at my own cultural conditioning and my own privilege and my own unseen prejudices, I fear that I'm not any different than a preacher or a colonist might be seen as, just informing the world of my new diversity gospel, you know? So there's something to think about. So, my tidbit this week. Well, I've been reading a lot of articles this week about politics and the election, which have freaked me out. I have also been listening to a ridiculously large amount of underground hip hop for some reason, and I wasn't sure which one to tidbit. And so I have decided to tidbit, and yes, I just turned that into a verb. I've decided to tidbit Juice Media. Robert Foster is one of my biggest intellectual crushes. Sadly, he's fictional, but he is the star of Juice Media. I'm going to put a link to his channel and some of his videos with this video, so that you can hear his amazing ability to wrap the news in this amazing, thought-provoking, deep, and really danceable way. In answer to your question, I would usually say that I'm a red-tailed hawk because I love red-tailed hawks, but I had this really cool dream last night that I was a wren, and so I think I'm a wren. And my question this week goes along with my Juice Media tidbit, and that is, who is your internet crush? And mine is, of course, the fictional and brilliant Robert Foster. So, until next week, I love you. I hope you're doing well. Send Montana my love.